Hello, friends, and welcome to the final episode of Weekly Witness for 2022. My name is Scott Atnip, your host and Texas Impact's Director of Public Witness, and this week, as the world reflects on 2022, the Texas Impact staff is celebrating the big Weekly Witness milestone of 2022, our 200th episode. So, as we prepare for the holidays and the end of this calendar year, we hope that you'll enjoy some of the highlights from our past episodes. Sometimes our episodes are time-sensitive, but many are faith or issue-based and are still relevant months or even years later. We'll try to do a better job of highlighting those episodes, but also encourage you to look back through the feed for content that's relevant for you in your current context. I also hope you enjoy this holiday season. Find some joy and peace and find some time to get some rest. We'll be back with you in January, just in time to start the Texas legislature. And y'all, it's going to be a busy 5 months to start the year, and Texas Impact will be here to resource your faithful advocacy work. So keep an eye on our website and social media for announcements and opportunities, including the Interfaith Service of Public Witness to kick off the legislative session January 10th, United Women in Faith legislative event at the end of January, and Interfaith Advocacy Days February 19th through 21st. Also, remember this is Texas Impact's 50th anniversary. So keep an eye out for special opportunities and special guests. Y'all, 50 years is quite a legacy, and we hope that you'll be joining us in celebrating. I hear there might even be occasions for cake. I also hope you'll join Texas Impact's Rapid Response Team, connect with our legislative engagement groups, or become an issue champion. You can find information about all of those at texasimpact.org. There are a ton of opportunities to make a difference during the legislative session, and we look forward to seeing you. But for now, I hope you enjoy this special edition of Weekly Witness and these highlights to send you into the holiday season. The first highlight for us today is from our conversation with the always prophetic and entertaining Reverend Dr. Frederick Douglass Haynes III as we discussed climate impacts through the lens of racial justice. What you can't see in this podcast is that his team had golden microphones that day when we recorded, and we felt big time.
For us, it's crucial as a people of faith who believe in a ministry of justice that we not focus only on cleaning up spider webs, but we've got to address the spider. And in our community, when you look at the whole concept of justice, eventually we're going to have to deal with the climate. And in dealing with the climate, we discover that so much of what ails communities of color, so much of what plagues people who are impoverished has to do with residential segregation. So David Walker of Harvard speaks of the fact that our life expectancy is not determined by our genetic code, but the zip code. And so zip code injustice, in a real sense, is often connected to environmental injustice. When you look at the fact that residential segregation places certain communities in close proximity to gas and oil refineries. As a matter of fact, Texas, Louisiana, and Oklahoma are the leading states in that order that have, in a disproportionate fashion, African Americans located in proximity to those kinds of oil and gas locations. Now, what that gives birth to asthma, cancer. I read a stat coming down here that black children die from cancer 10 times more than white children. Black children are hospitalized 4.5 more times than white children from asthma. And so all of that is enough to let us know that theologically, we need to go back to Genesis 1. In the beginning, God created. We believe that for real. And then to think that God then gave us stewardship over nature. And in giving us stewardship over nature, there's a passage where it talks about God said, subdue, rule. And that's been misused via a gospel of greed. And that gospel of greed has really just misconstrued the original word. The original word was also used for a shepherd caring for serving the sheep, because the life of a shepherd is connected to the health of the sheep. And so if we're going to do this thing right, we must recognize that we are the shepherds of nature who have stewardship over nature, and our health, our life is connected vitally to how we treat the planet. And so, unfortunately, we live in a state that, again, the gospel of greed blinds us to these realities. And the bottom line is, as people of faith who believe in justice, it's hard to believe in justice when we talk about, okay, those who are suffering because of this, that, and the other, and we don't deal with the root cause, the spider, which is climate change, environmental injustice. And so that's why that's why we're here. We're here because we believe that Texas has a responsibility to the least of these. And as people of faith, and I'll give you one more biblically, Jesus put the spotlight on the Jericho Road. He names the Jericho Road in response to a question about loving one's neighbor. And so the spotlight of the Jericho Road as a place that is unhealthy, because it was known in biblical antiquity that the Jericho Road was dangerous. And so for the Savior to name it is to put the spotlight on it and say, okay, I'm not just concerned about someone who does good on the road. I'm saying we need to deal with the road. And so what we're here to do today in Austin is to say, we're here to deal with the road. And the road is dangerous. The road is unhealthy. And when you look at cancer rates and asthma rates in communities of color that already have a lack of access to health care, it's like it's a snowball effect of injustice that I think we as a people of faith need to address.
Back in January 2021, at the start of the 87th Texas legislature, we welcomed former State Representative Sarah Davis, who represented the medical center in Houston, to discuss Medicaid expansion, which is always a part of Texas Impact's legislative priorities. All right, so this is an issue we've been talking about for years, but former Texas House Speaker Strauss said in October 2020 that expanding Medicaid is a smart business move. So in addition to those million Texans, it's also good for business in a state that prides itself on its business climate. So do you agree? And if so, why?
I absolutely agree with Speaker Strauss. In fact, I think the only thing I ever disagreed with him on was his retirement. He is, such a statesman, and it was just such a privilege to get to serve as his chairman in various capacities. But he's absolutely right. I think there was just a Perryman, who is a very well-known and accomplished economist here in Texas, released a very thorough report. And I'm not going to bog you down with all the details, but ultimately the conclusion was that the economic benefits that could be gained during the 2022 through the 2023 biennium, because remember, we write 2-year budgets in the state, would include over $45.3 billion in gross product and 670,000 job years of employment. So that's a huge economic impact. I also had discussions with economists, healthcare economists, about the impact that Medicaid expansion could have on our property taxes. Because if, like, I live in Houston and Reverend Davis from Houston, a lot of us that live in large cities probably have hospital districts that are charged with providing care to the poor. And that is a taxing jurisdiction. That is a line item on your property tax bill. And so in the long run, I think you can make the argument that if we were to move this population that is receiving their health care through the hospital districts that are uninsured into an insured situation like Medicaid, that you would actually see some legitimate relief on your property taxes. And I also think, when we're looking at a really tough budget cycle. I know the comptroller said we're looking at a $1 billion shortfall. I'm not entirely sure if that accounts for the couple $billion we shortchange Medicaid at the end in every budget. But it is not going to be an easy budget to write next session. And there are ways that we can actually, pay for Medicaid by transitioning folks that are getting healthcare services that are being paid for strictly with state dollars into the Medicaid program. And how that saves the state money is going back to that term FMAP, because the Medicaid expansion population would enjoy a much larger FMAP. So if we were to have a Medicaid expansion population, that's actually a 90-10 match. So that means that the federal government would pay for 90% or send down 90% of the costs, where the state would have to come up with the 10%. And there are plenty of there are plenty of sources that you can come up with to find the money that would pay for itself, purely because we wouldn't need those state-run programs anymore. Those populations would transition into Medicaid. So there is definitely ways to pay for it, and there is definitely, I don't think, a more important economic time really to embrace Medicaid expansion. And at the end of the day, we're only one of 12 states that haven't done it. So we're all paying for Medicaid expansion. We're just paying for it for everyone else except for Texans.
Right.
And that doesn't make good sense. Why should our Texas tax dollars, not stay in Texas? So no, I think Joe is 100% right. And I think that it's just a very, it just makes economic sense, and it just makes, health sense. We've got people that are participating in very targeted state healthcare programs, maybe for substance abuse, maybe it's Healthy Texas Women, but they're not getting a holistic approach to healthcare. And so you don't see good outcomes. And you, especially as Reverend Davis mentioned, we have horrible outcomes in our minority populations, as evidence of what we see going on with COVID and how it's ravaging our communities of color.
As I was looking back over the list of episodes, I noticed that we've recorded many episodes on immigration, and many of those feature Lutheran bishops. This clip was from Bishop Sue Briner soon after her trip to D.C., which coincided with Governor Abbott's political stunt sending migrants to the capital city. What do you wish congregations would know, or what do you wish congregations would be doing right now?
I certainly wish that they would be able to understand a lot better that these are people who are here legally seeking asylum, that they need to be afforded the same dignity and respect that we give to every human being. We have, in the U.S., spent a lot of time and attention in the media and locally in praying for and welcoming Ukrainians, which is fantastic.
Right.
But it is heart-wrenching that we do not have the same level of welcome for our Black and brown brothers and sisters who are fleeing, in a lot of cases, the same kinds or different kinds of terrible life situations.
Do you think that's in part because of how the media has chosen to cover Ukraine versus what's happening down south? And how does the media narrative match what you all saw in person in visiting with these families?
Yeah, so it absolutely makes a difference. We've been pretty much glued to the television watching Ukraine coverage, right? Mm-hmm. And all of the different ways that they're reporting on exactly what's going on. Part of the issue is that places like Venezuela, Senegal, Cuba, we're not reporting from there. So people have no idea. And everyone's kind of lumped together like these are, people trying to get into our country illegally and take our jobs. And that's just frankly not true.
I'm curious, as a faith leader, Where has the church typically put migration in terms of prioritization? And maybe where should it be now and in the future? And should we be looking at a more whole church response than currently exists?
Yeah, great question. So Lutherans, and I'll just talk about our brand for a moment, right? We have a deep history of being involved in immigration. So after World War II, when there were so many displaced people around the country, we formed Lutheran Immigration and Refugee Services.
Right.
And we've been resettling people for years and years and years. And we ourselves are an immigrant people. You know, we immigrated from various parts of Europe to come over to the U.S. looking for a better life. And so we, and our church as well, we have claimed ourselves as a sanctuary denomination.
Right.
We have also we have a big initiative called Amparo, which is accompanying unaccompanied minors as they cross the border. So we as a denomination, in theory, have a big stake in this immigration work. That said, it doesn't always translate down to the local congregational level. And particularly here in Texas, because there's, as you're probably aware, it's pretty polarized political climate. And you layer onto that some of the impacts of the pandemic, where people essentially spent the last 2 years kind of turned inward, right? So there is a great opportunity for a whole church response. And in fact, I have initiated a virtual border summit for next week with all of the bishops that are along the border in the U.S. with Lutheran Immigration Refugee Service, Amparo, Lutheran Social Services, all of our organizations that are involved in some way in immigration, to say, hey, friends, how do we get better coordinated with this, right? Because there's a lot of great activity going on, not only in our denomination, but really there are some exceptional interfaith ecumenical partners, other nonprofits that are all working really hard in this area. If we could just figure out ways to get better aligned and to connect in with the work that the government is trying to do, we could be amazing.
One of the lasting images of the last legislative session was Senator Carol Alvarado keeping the floor of the Senate all night in a filibuster to fight the voter suppression bill. She joined the Weekly Witness conversation to talk about why that was so important. So tell us about the process that you went through to make that decision that you were going to take that stand. It couldn't have been easy.
No, especially realizing that I wasn't going to be able to filibuster for weeks, right? The bill would pass, but I felt that we needed to hit the pause button because, the previous session had moved so quickly in the middle of the night. If you recall, during the Memorial weekend when the bill passed, and there were a lot of new things in it when it passed. And eventually, the bill sponsor Republicans acknowledged that, there was a lot of stuff in there. And they were trying to hurry up and get through because then we were in a filibuster to kill a bill window during the Senate. And I was going to filibuster then, which would have made a strong impact because it would have killed the bill. But when they realized we were in the window, they suspended the rules and brought it up a lot sooner. So fast forward to the next session, I felt that we needed to highlight some things that were in the bill that people may not have realized, that issues dealing with our senior citizens and the disabled. And a lot of the things that we talked about and that I talked about during that 15 hours are problematic today, which is why you've seen, in some cases, up to 40% of applications / ballots rejected. So realizing that the bill would pass, I wasn't sure about doing it because I didn't know what kind of an impact it would have. But during that time, I was able to highlight some things like the poll watchers as well. Then when the bill went back to the House, they changed it and added a mandatory training for poll watchers. So I feel like, there were maybe one or two things, positive things that came out of the filibuster, but I felt like Texas Democrats had really put everything on the line, had gone to DC, broken quorum a few times. I went to DC, and I felt like this was just one of those moments and that you really need to step out of your comfort zone and go the extreme, because I felt that the measures in the bill were extreme.
This week's episode of Weekly Witness was brought to you by Methodist Healthcare Ministries of South Texas.
We at Texas Impact predict public education and private school vouchers will be a significant topic next legislative session, so Weekly Witness featured a 4-part series on public education this fall. This clip features Sherry Miller, past president of the Texas Classroom Teachers Association. What does the political landscape look like for public school policy, and what should listeners be watching for here in Texas?
I think that one of the big issues this year in the next legislative session is going to be vouchers. I think we need to make sure that every dollar that we spend on education is money that is well spent. And so that means that everyone is accountable, whether your child is in public school or if vouchers are approved on some level, that the voucher money is used to educate our students well. And that if voucher money is used, there is a standard at which that educational facility must be providing that education. Also, another one is going to be teacher salaries. I think that is going to be a big, big issue, and it definitely needs to be. A first-year teacher currently in the state of Texas, a first-year teacher base pay is $33,000. Now, many of these first-year teachers have just come out of college, whether they went through a teacher education program or received their degree in another area. $33,000. When you're considering student loans that these teachers have to start paying back, that's very little money for the responsibility and the requirements for the job. In looking and listening at many districts across the state and just having been in Las Vegas, it looks like many of the states are going up to the $50,000 arena as far as being in the $50,000 range for starting new teachers. I think Houston and Dallas, and possibly some of the San Antonio and Fort Worth area districts have gone a little bit higher in the 60s. But I think for starting first-year teachers, most are in the $50,000 range. Our particular district right now is starting at $56,000. So for a first-year teacher. But that is something that definitely has to take place. We have an extreme teacher shortage, and it's been coming along for a while, but I don't think that definitely state legislators did not want to really recognize this was starting to happen. I think that school administrations were hoping that it would not happen, but this is the year that there were, and last year as well. So many retirements are now happening because the baby boomer generation is retiring. But it's not just the baby boomer generation. It is brand new teachers, 1, 2, 5 years, 10 years. We're losing people that really would make very good teachers, but they are just overwhelmed and they're not getting the support that they need.
And finally, as part of our Legislative Priorities Preview series, we were joined by Reverend Dr. Susan Frederick Gray, president of the Unitarian Universalist Association, to discuss support for the LGBT community. So our listeners are predominantly people of faith, and I think we'll all understand your idea that we don't all agree on everything, right? And certainly that is true in most of our local congregations, especially if we extend that out to 1,000 different congregations. But I was really interested in reading a recent piece that you published in Religion Dispatches, in the Religion Dispatches, where you talked about the idea that 90+% of Unitarian Universalists agree with the idea that we should have access to abortion rights and reproductive health in most cases, or if not all cases. That same percentage, 90+%, believed that we should have anti-discrimination legislation for the LGBT community. And so there was certainly a lot of agreement, not unanimity, but a lot of agreement among your members on those two issues. And so you used that agreement to make the case that this was more than just support for those issues, but it was a religious freedom issue that we needed to be thinking about. So can you talk to us some about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, the Public Religion Research Institute found out that 97% of Unitarian Universalists support non-discrimination protections for LGBTQIA+, and over 90% support access to legal abortion in most cases. So I argue that if that percentage over 97% in one case support a particular view on things, that you can call that a part of our fundamental teaching. And it is. I mean, we are committed to creating inclusive, welcoming communities. We teach age-appropriate, comprehensive sexuality education to our youth, and it includes the affirmation and celebration of a spectrum of gender identity and sexual orientation. So this is part of what we teach our families, what we teach our young people. It is foundational. And so it is a part of our religious beliefs. It's part of how we raise our kids and how we nurture spiritual community. So when Governor Abbott or the Attorney General in Texas say that providing trans-affirming healthcare and allowing that in a family, supporting that in a family, is child abuse. Like, this is dangerous. It not only threatens the children from being taken from their parents, but it is fundamentally the government intervening in how parents raise their children and how religious communities affirm and support the children and families of their communities. So, for example, I mean, in those policies, it calls for doctors and professionals to report if they know something like this. That puts ministers potentially in a position of having to disclose or put their families at risk because the ministers are aware of the children's health care. So this is fundamentally a violation of religious freedom. It's one thing churches don't all have to agree, but we have to have the freedom to practice our beliefs. And in our communities, in UU communities, we practice welcome and inclusion for all our folks, regardless of gender identity, regardless of sexual orientation. We think the diversity of identity is a spiritual gift, is something that's beautiful, the diversity of humanity in that way, gender and sexuality. We celebrate it, we affirm it. And for the government to say that that's abuse is fundamentally a violation of our religious freedom. And all religious people should care about this. All religious people should care about the government intervening in how parents raise their kids and how churches support their families and kids.
Amen. All right, friends, that's a wrap on 2022. I hope you enjoyed listening to some of our favorite Weekly Witness memories from previous episodes, and I hope you all have a great holiday season. We'll miss you, but I look forward to working with you in 2023. Between now and then, I hope you'll consider making a year-end gift to support Texas Impact and the Weekly Witness community. Check out texasimpact.org for more information. And remember, the world needs Texans of faith active and engaged. So let's prepare to get to work in 2023.
Witness is hosted by Scott Atnett, engineered and produced by David Fasalo. Our executive producer is B. Moorhead. The opinions expressed on Weekly Witness are those of Texas Impact and our guests, and do not necessarily reflect the views of our sponsors. Weekly Witness is a product of Texas Impact, people of faith working for justice. Visit us online at texasimpact.org.